As Mark has indicated, I'm emeritus faculty at Penn State. I'm a professor of mining engineering. And my colleagues and I from Penn State, thank you very much for your interest in this seminar. It is our hope that your investment of your valuable time and the investment of the speakers, they have come from near and far and have a tremendous amount of experience and knowledge in this area and a willingness to share for the benefit of the mining industry. I hope investment of their time and investment of your time turns out to be good for not only you, but also for the mining industry. The seminar is being organized under the Brookwood Sego, but I have to say, if you take a look at the board behind us, there are many other supporters from industry, from manufacturers, and we appreciate this support not only specifically for this seminar, but also our miner training program. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania supports our mining training program to a large extent, but the operators in Pennsylvania support it quite a bit too. And we certainly appreciate this support to the health and safety activities. Over the years, a lot has been said about health and safety management. There are books, there are proceedings, there are papers, a lot of research being done. The search for answering the question why some mines or companies have a better health and safety record than others. This question has been a burning question, and we are still trying to answer that question. The reason is even the better companies with better records want to do even better than what they are doing, and companies that are lagging behind in some of the statistics, they want to do better than what they are doing and catch up with these companies that are in the lead. And this is a worthwhile chase because safety is like quality. Safety can always be improved. Affordable safety is the key question. Can we afford it and still be in business? But safety is like quality, and safety can be improved. And we have done a lot. Our statistics by traditional measure is very good. Yet, we have accidents, illnesses, and injuries, and occasionally disasters. The US coal industry had its deadliest year in 2010 in nearly 2 decades. In 2010, the idea of a completely safe mine is a very worthwhile and noble idea. But as we know, very complex systems, hazards tend to exist, and they exist in nooks and corners, and it is our job to find these hazards and eliminate them. There are very few acts of God when it comes to mine accidents. Thomas Huxley, the famous English philosopher, once said, chance and accidents are aliases of ignorance. He was talking about the natural phenomena that occurs and how early humans wondered and thought this was a chance occurrence, and how science and engineering explain some of these things. We are not doing the right things when we have accidents, and therefore we have to question ourselves a number of questions. Are we finding and fixing the right problem? Are we using the right metrics? Are we providing the right kind of training, the right kind of management? Are there better methods, newer methods that can do our job better? And there are many similar questions, and this seminar is being organized to address one of these areas, which has been in popular vogue for nearly 30 years now. Ever since the 3 Mile Island, the nuclear industry has started into looking at what they call a culture at the workplace. Then the 2 space accidents, then the accident at Chernobyl, then accidents in oil and gas industries. All these have raised questions. There is something wrong in managing very complex systems, and what's wrong? Where is this thing lie? And they say it's something about culture. My point is, we don't know much about culture and what is culture. So the seminar has two objectives. One, to develop an understanding of the safety culture and culture change. How do we go about getting it? And second objective is to develop an understanding of the processes and practices involved in applying the tools and techniques and methods of safety culture to mining industry. Our speakers will attempt to do this. Then we will have a round table. I have requested all the speakers to come to the round table, and we will have about 8 people sitting here, and they will take questions from the audience and answer questions. To make our job simple, what I'm going to do is not have any questions after every presentation. Please write your questions down on the tablet, pass it along to Joe Flick in the back, or Mark Adamski. They will walk around after the presentation and collect your papers with your questions, and I will organize them, raise them during the round table, and all the speakers will get a chance to address it. As you can see, these speakers come from different perspectives: research perspective, consulting perspective, application in industry, and that will be interesting to see how they approach this particular issue. With that, once again, I want to say that our speakers come with different background. Our first speaker is Dr. Kyle Peck from Penn State. Dr. Peck and I met each other in the mid-80s, when we were working on, of course, we could have been mid-50s, you know, for me. He and I worked on a model miner training program that was a project funded by U.S. Bureau of Mines over a period of 5 years at Penn State. And Dr. Peck came with his education background to tell us little about some of the aspects of learning and training. And though when we were thinking about this particular seminar, we thought Dr. Peck will be an excellent speaker to start the symposium. He has since then moved on to a number of areas, including introducing culture change in education. Dr. Peck.
Thank you, Dr. Ram. Oh, I have to hit this switch here. Thank you. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Not working. Let's see. Testing, testing, testing. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, but it's important for you guys. Oh, you got me back there. Okay, so that's for you, not for this. Okay, we're good then. Sorry, gentlemen. Dr. Ramani had to convince me that it was that I had something to offer the group, because I know a little about mine safety, and I know what I know, and I wasn't sure about the connection at first. I started, my first contact with any corporate training at all, industrial training, was with mine training. I was a middle school teacher in Leadville, Colorado, and I went up and toured the molybdenum mine at Climax, Colorado, and they showed me their training sessions and everything since I was a teacher and had been an instructional designer before that. And I thought it was, very, very interesting and impressive. So that was my first experience with it. But since that time, and even before that time, I know there have been issues with mining training. It's very important. Improving mine safety is important, and it's noble work. I mean, what's more noble than preventing injury and preventing loss? It's the intent, the focus of a lot of different training programs, but it's really hard to do. Partly because knowledge is necessary, but not sufficient. And what we need to, I believe, and Dr. Ramani and others are beginning to believe, is a change in culture where knowledge becomes part of everyday behavior, and not just by individuals, but by groups, where groups end up supporting this notion and doing things together to make that happen. So I've been asked to share the lessons from the field of education. We've been trying to change schools for a long time. Schools have very entrenched cultures that go back decades and decades, and it's very difficult to change them. But we've had people studying how to change school cultures for a long time, and I do believe that the lessons that we've learned are absolutely relevant in trying to change cultures in mining organizations as well. We've learned a lot, mostly about what doesn't work. Okay? But now, increasingly, as people start to look at complexity theory and chaos theory and complex organizations and have stopped expecting that we can implement this silver bullet or we can add this leader and things are going to get better, we're starting to make some real progress. So we're seeing some big changes across large systems. In Britain's education system, for example, where some of these processes are being applied and used more so than they are in the United States. What happens without these kinds of approaches is there is change momentarily, and then a year later, 2 years later, there's no evidence that a change was implemented at all. Rand did a study of educational innovations, and that was their conclusion. Go back 4 years later, and there's almost no evidence that anything was done. Because systems, complex systems, protect themselves and rebuild themselves. I won't go into the language associated with that, but it's a mechanism. That's what a system does. It repairs itself. It regroups. So there has been recent progress using models, as I mentioned, based on systems theory. If you can help get people to understand that this change over here affects everything over here, that this little change has implications, and things they do make a big difference. One of the changes that they've discovered is, well, this is one of the examples that is often used by Malcolm Gladwell in The Tipping Point and other places, is New York City had a big problem with crime, still does, but it was bigger. And they found that by doing things like replacing broken windows and painting out graffiti and doing some things that weren't really even directly related to crime, that they could reduce crime rates in neighborhoods. That's a classic example, and there are others. I only have 30 minutes, so I'm really going to race through this. I can't go into too many. But trust me, there's increasing evidence that little changes have impacts later on. But what makes improving mine safety so difficult? Partly because it's not just what we know, but it's who we are. Who we are as individuals, but more importantly, people are saying as organizations. What does the organization value? When a new person is hired and becomes part of a crew or part of a management team, what are the expectations around safety, and how are those conveyed? How are those lived? It's not what we say, and it's not the posters we put on the wall. It's the way people operate, and that's what has to change. And it has to be sustained over time. And as I mentioned, most attempts at change are sort of one-shot things that don't have much of an impact. So it's about changing the culture of our organizations, as Dr. Ramani said. Well, what is culture? One of the many different dictionary definitions of it, because there are like 9 noun definitions of the word culture, from biological cultures to other things, is the behaviors and beliefs, characteristics of a particular social, ethnic, or age group. Those are examples. It can be a work group as well. But it's really, the culture is about the beliefs and attitudes. Oh, now I start to see why it's hard to change. I know that I shouldn't eat as much as I do and I should get more exercise. That's not a knowledge issue. Okay? That's about beliefs and attitudes. People know they shouldn't smoke. We can educate kids about the harms of drugs. Knowledge is a different thing than beliefs and attitudes. So I gave away the answer to that question. Training and education aren't likely to change beliefs and attitudes. There are a couple of different things that can do it. One, significant emotional events. If I fall asleep at the wheel and drive off the road and live through it, that can change my practices, my beliefs, my attitudes about driving while sleepy or driving after having a drink or whatever. Significant emotional event can change beliefs and attitudes, and so can prolonged exposure to thinking about that and talking about things. It's increasingly evident in education that learning is largely a social activity. And one of the things we're going to do a little later is I'm going to have you talk with me about some things to get things going, because I know it's not what I say that's important, it's what goes on in your head that's important. And when you have to talk, things are going on in your head that will have impact. So when I work with teachers in schools, we often sit around. There's not much of this. There's more conversations around a table saying, what are grades for? What are the point of grades? And they say, well, they represent what's learned in a course. No, not really, because you take off points for not turning in assignments and And when they talk about that and think about that, then they drive home, and that's going on in their heads. If I just say it to them, they'll, Wonder Woman's bracelets it off, I send ideas to them, and they can just say, well, that's not really me, or whatever. But if they think about it and they say things, it has a different impact. Cultures, even more than individual people, are resistant to change. Because if we were a working culture altogether, I might be getting through to some of you, but not others. Okay, so there's always the status quo never completely goes away in short-term events. Most of what I'm going to be saying today is based on the work of Dr. Michael Fullan from Toronto. He's recognized in education, certainly, as the leader in terms of educational change, studying educational change and what makes it happen. He's also acknowledged outside of the field of education because of the work he's done, but he is focused on education. And most of what I'm going to be sharing with you today comes from two books, Leading in a Culture of Change and Change Forces with a Vengeance. Leading in a Culture of Change talks about how tough it is to be an effective leader in a time when everything's dynamic. And a place where we realize, if you're a systems thinker and you realize that everything affects other things, then you realize that while I'm working on this, other things are changing out there. And it's like playing three-dimensional chess. Because you might make a move, but then other things are going to move, and you have to respond to those too. And it's sort of three-dimensional in that you really can't see, and it's hard to think all the things through. So it's hard to lead and hard to manage when unanticipated, unpredictable forces are out there. So, when we think of great leaders, we think of people, who say, "Follow me," and they know where they're going, and people, well, that's one kind of leadership, but that's not what's going to change a culture. That might get a thing done, but it doesn't change a culture. Michael Fullan reminds us it's a humbling proposition. Contexts don't change easily. And complexity theory is the operative paradigm. That's what I was just getting at with things moving all around us. Which means that systems can't be managed and reforms rarely unfold as intended. So it's just, like playing chess. I think if I do this, you're going to do that. But often you won't do what I think, and I have to adjust. Dr. Fullan says the vast majority of people in the system have to end up owning the solution to the problem and become agents in the solution of that. So what we need to do is get everybody to say, it's my problem. He also says we need to create the conditions and processes that will enhance the likelihood that we move down the path to this ownership. Ownership of the problem is important. He says, in common sense terms, we need to do these things. Start with the notion of moral purpose. And again, as I said, it's noble. What we're trying to do, reduce accidents, that's noble. That's, motherhood, apple pie, every student has a right to learn. People should have a workplace that's safe. Nobody's, life should be at risk. Nobody's, welfare should be at risk. You have to get people to realize that what they're doing is important and it's the right thing to do. That they're coming from this place of ethical purpose and correctness. Then you need to create communities of interaction around these ideas. So you need to take this moral purpose and other ideas that are going to get generated and have people who are thinking about that and talking about that together. You need to ensure that quality information is infused into the system. What happens often, if you take a group of people and they start talking about something, all they know is what they know. And all they know is basically what they've been doing. So status quo can get preserved if you have people talk and there's no influx of new ideas. So it's common to have sister schools or partner schools, partner organizations who are talking. Or to have outsiders come in and drop some ideas, which may be why I was asked to come here. But the idea is that in these conversations, you have to have a diverse group of people, and they have to be infused with ideas from the outside from time to stimulate the thinking and keep it from being groupthink and static. And then you need to look for promising patterns. Find those small successes and build on those. Make sure everybody sees them and feels that there is progress being made and we can move ahead from here. How many of you have seen or at least heard about Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point? It's an interesting, his is really a look at why things take off. Why do certain things become popular? And it turns out that it's not one huge thing. There's not one big reason. It's like a whole bunch of little things get into line, and then it just, these forces move over. It's about communication and momentum. But it's not, what we think, well, if we're going to make this happen, we have to do, big thing X. But it turns out not to be the case. A series of little things in concert can be that tipping point. And the reason I kind of like that idea is the idea that, status quo seems, it seems impenetrable. But if we can just, put pressure on it, it's going to start to move. Now, tipping point, I don't really like that because it makes it sound like, well, once it starts to tip, it's going to come down like a tree. But that's not really what happens in cultures. What happens is, it's more like, moving a wall. Like if we try to, push these walls back, right? First we might be pushing, it's not happening, but eventually one more person comes on this side, or somebody folds the wall a little over here, either move some resisting forces or increase some forces moving in the right direction. All of a sudden it starts to move. But you got to keep pushing it or it doesn't happen. So I like tipping point. About momentum and communications, but the idea of tipping, I think, makes it sound like it's going to happen when it happens really fast, which is true about the things that he was talking about, but it's not true for us here. And Michael Fullan talks about tipping point too, but again, I think it's not a great metaphor for cultural change. It's more like, getting a car. If you ever try to push a stalled car, getting that first few steps is tougher, but once it starts to roll, it's easier to keep it rolling than it is to get it rolling. I skipped one here. This is an interesting, you've heard about the butterfly effect, where in the chaos theory, where one little thing over here, a butterfly's wing flapping in Texas can affect the weather in Chicago. Well, here's sort of a spin on that says, if the flapping of a butterfly's wings in Texas can dramatically change weather patterns in Chicago, then the flapping of one's mouth or seemingly innocuous decisions or random behaviors can dramatically affect an organization's future. Right? So it sort of gets at if little things end up rippling and having big effects, so can little things in the workplace. And so we don't necessarily have to change all the big things if we just sort of get some of the little things in line. Then we can build some of that momentum and things start to move in the right direction. About leadership, Fullan and others point out that charismatic leadership really works. It's not only doesn't lead to sustainability, it's negatively associated with sustainability. A lot of times you get a great leader who come in and just a natural charismatic leader, and people say, yeah, I'll go, I'll do this. But that doesn't lead to long-term change. It may get you started, but it won't be sustained. He also points out that top-down changes don't really work. You can't just say, we're all going to start doing this. That doesn't do it either. What we need is a new kind of leadership at many levels in the organization. Many levels in the organization. So everybody has to kind of take the lead. Work groups have to take the lead. Individuals have to do key things. I don't know all the structures in a mining organization. But we've got to get leadership on it from all organizations. Okay, and then they have to be working on a whole bunch of different things at once. Okay, so it's like three-dimensional chess. If you just, use your queen, you're not going to get very far. But if you're moving different pieces, you can have a change on the broader field of the dynamics of the culture you're trying to change. So you got to work on a bunch of things simultaneously with shared leadership. I think I actually mentioned this pretty well already. This is about, so you get these people talking and working on things, but you have to bring in new ideas from the outside. The Centers for Disease Control has, spent a lot of time talking about cultures of change as well, because they're trying to get people to change, the way they live and operate in order to prevent the spread of diseases. And they've, said in a culture of safety, the focus is on effective systems and teamwork to accomplish the mutual goal of safe, high-quality performance. When something goes wrong, the focus is on what rather than who is the problem. Okay, and Peter Senge pointed this out in the fifth discipline too, which was about, one of those was about systems thinking. So when something goes wrong, we try and find out who did it, who's responsible for this, how could you, but that's not, it's usually a system thing, a communication thing, a logistic thing, something else. So you need to figure out what caused the problem rather than starting to look for fault in individuals. It's a mind shift change. But if you believe you're hiring good people, you've got good people, and they're not getting along or things aren't happening the way you think, it's probably not the people. It's probably the way the system operates. Excuse me. Okay, so here's a little thing I got from, this actually isn't from education, it was from corporate dynamics. But I really like it and it makes sense to me. So when does change happen? Well, change happens, this equation said, I know I'm talking too much and I have an activity, so I'm going to keep blasting through this rather than, I'm going to answer my own questions. I know not to do that, but I only have a half an hour, so I'm going to blast through it so we can talk about the next thing. So change happens when vision times dissatisfaction, and this is a positive dissatisfaction. It's not just disgruntled people. Vision times dissatisfaction times first steps is greater than resistance. Okay, and what that's about is, if you don't see a better alternative, you're not going to move. All right, so in general, change happens when somebody says, it could be like that. Well, with mind safety, that's a pretty easy vision to have. I mean, no injuries or fewer injuries or, fewer lost lives or. So the vision of a safe workplace is pretty easily established. Then this dissatisfaction really comes from, looking at the difference between that and what you have. But again, it's not dissatisfaction in the form of, this place sucks. They just don't care about me or the workers or whatever. It's like, you know what, we're not there yet. That's kind of dissatisfaction. A positive, we can do this attitude that is based on, a positive outlook. Then the first steps is, so if I see a better future and I know that we're not there yet, but I don't see anything I can do right now, nothing happens. I like the fact that this is a mathematical equation and those things are multiplied by each other, because what happens if you multiply something by 0? Nothing, right? So if any of those things is missing, it goes nowhere. If you can make each of those things bigger, you get somewhere. So this kind of gives you an opportunity to say, hey, what can we do? And in most cases, again, mind safety, the vision's an easy thing. But in changing schools, it's not. A lot of people can't really see a very different future. So working on vision is important in that culture change. But first steps, if they don't see what they can do to make a difference, that's a problem. And then resistance. What that all boils down to is this. Change happens when motivation overpowers resistance. Well, that's pretty easy to see, but that didn't help me. I like the first equation because it helps me think about aspects of what to do within motivation. So here's the first little activity I'm going to have us do. I like this technique. I didn't invent it. I'm told, I've heard that Benjamin Franklin did. But we've all kind of done this before. It's called a force field analysis. You draw a line, and you put the things, the advantages on one side, disadvantages on the other side. We're trying to change cultures. I always draw a wheel at the bottom to show this is a movable wall, right? It's on a wheel, and we can push it. And we've got forces pushing in the right direction and forces pushing in the wrong direction. So if we can increase the forces, or first of all, if we can understand the forces on each side, we can get somewhere. By the way, this is an activity. Again, we don't have time to play it out fully. We're going to do some of this. But if you could do this with people in your organization about what's keeping us where we are, or what's the reason we are where we are, and do something like this with them, and you don't need a fancy computer-based version of this. You can just draw it up on a whiteboard or a flip chart, and people can do this. But what are some of the things that are pushing us towards a culture of safety? Got a culture of safety over here on the goal to the right. And I choose to do that because we read left to right, so progress is kind of this way. And have culture of neglect. I didn't know what to call that other side. So, you can even leave that out. But what are some of the things that you would put on the green side? Now, what I'm going to do is jump out of my presentation into the editable mode, and I'm going to go in here, and we're going to change this word "for" to whatever you think. What's one thing pushing us in the right direction? Health. Great. What's another? Great. What else? Oops. Setting objectives. What else? Or anybody wants, if you want to go on the other side, you can do that too. Okay, measurement and feedback on this side. Rats, I knew that was going to happen. Okay. Get the idea? Let's jump over onto the other side for a moment here. What are some of the things that work against mine safety?
Nobody cares.
Hey. Really, that's hard to believe. But I do believe you. But you'd think, again, because of the moral purpose and the fact that it's their own health and safety and lives, that it would be different. What are some other things that work against you?
Poor logistics.
Okay. Can you give me an example?
The supplies aren't there, and folks are going out to do the job. The right tools aren't there.
Thank you. Great. Thanks. What else? I kind of did this, myself, not knowing the mine industry. I put a little one together, not on the screen, but on the back cover of the book, Michael Fullan's book, as I was in an airplane trying to see if this was going to work out and I could come up with a good bunch. And I came up with some good ones too. You'll obviously come up with better ones. And it's more important that you do that with a group. Because when you do that with a group, then again, we're trying to build ownership. One of the things I said was important, ownership. So if they do this, they end up owning this. And one of the reasons I like this is you can say, okay, so now who's going to do what? If these are the things we need to do to get there, then, okay, so we're going to put people on, what can we do about poor logistics? And now people can enlist, say, well, I've got something to do with logistics. I've got some ideas about that. I'll work on that one. And people end up aligning themselves with trying to make things on the right smaller and make things on the left bigger. By the way, one of the things I do when I work with this kind of process is I look at each of those and say, how important is it and how modifiable is it? Right? And then I'll often change this chart so the importance, I used to have a dynamic one back in the HyperCard days for you Apple people, where I could give it a rating for importance and a rating for modifiability, and it would automatically change the font size. So that the things that were really important show up big and the other things show up small. But you can just do this on your own, even with a pen after if you're doing it in some other form. But if you look at training, how important is that on a scale of 1 to 10? I don't know, even though training's my field. But you can get your team to agree on that. How modifiable is it? Well, it's actually quite modifiable. I mean, there are costs, so there are some limitations on that, but it's got a pretty high modifiability rating and pretty high importance rating. Yeah, we should probably work on that. So sometimes you see like money shows up in here, funding. All right, it's very real, very important, not very modifiable. So maybe that's something you don't spend a lot of time trying to change. So the next step after you do this is to say, and again, with a group. And it's not somebody who does this in his or her office and then comes down and says, here's what we're going to do. The power of having people go through that process can build the kind of culture that you're looking for, can get people invested, get them talking, get them to own some of the ideas, and then actually identify things that people can work on. So that was short, but I have a little article about this. If anybody wants it, let me know and I'll send it to you, about change happens when in this model. Oops, I need to get back into the presentation mode here. So what makes an effective leader? So no, I'm going to back up. I was going to have you just say this, and I was going to put this up early, and you were going to say, you know, strength or whatever. If you're thinking Patton or, you know, some Vince Lombardi or Joe Paterno or whatever, you'd come up with, you know, a certain set of terms that aren't really what we're talking about here. You might say charisma, and all those other things, if we had done this early. But the answer is very different. You know, when you think about it, and again, I'd let you answer this question. We'd spend some time here, but I'm run out. So the answer today is different. You know, if we'd done this 20 years ago, those are the kinds of things I would have heard. Because people didn't understand complexity and ownership and, you know, team as well as we do now, work group. So here's the best model I've seen for what effective leadership looks like and the results of effective leadership. I'm back to Michael Fullan again. And he has this model that starts with leaders and the characteristics of leaders. And I knew you wouldn't be able to read that, so I enhanced it a little bit. But outside this circle that describes effective leaders, there are characteristics of effective leaders. And he includes in those hope. And he calls that, you know, in the text that supports that, he says unfounded optimism. In other words, you've got to be somebody who knows this can happen, even though you're not going to see progress all the time and things are going to, you know, go wrong and, you know, all these other variables. So this is really almost an unjustifiable, sure we can do it, you know, but not off the deep end there, but somebody who can bounce back, who's resilient, who knows it can be done. Energy. You know, it takes a lot of energy to do this. Thinking with people is actually harder than telling them what to do. And so it takes a lot of energy, and again, energy to overcome the setbacks. Enthusiasm. Okay, so he's got these characteristics around the outside that good leaders are going to have in this kind of change operation. And then inside he has 5 action mindsets, he calls them. These are more like characteristics or things you can do. I would call them more skills as opposed. I would call these on the outside sort of attributes and the inside skills or capabilities. And those include a strong sense of moral purpose. In other words, this leader, too, has to understand we're doing this for right reasons. You know, education's for students. This is the one shot they've got. If we blow their education, they're doomed. You know, they have a right to a good education. With mind safety, again, that's easy to establish. An understanding of the dynamics of change. You know, what's change about? And the fact that it doesn't happen. And do some of this reading of some of these people who are talking about change and how hard it is and how, you know, it's going to take time and it comes from ownership. And so they have a kind of a background in this. Great emotional intelligence, the ability to build strong relationships. I think that trust is huge, and trust is hard in a mining organization where you've got a profit motive and you've got management and you've got unions. But trust and relationships are important. And the extent to which this person can build relationships, again, that's not charisma. Charisma is people instantly like you. This is different. This is the ability to work with people and create a sense of caring. A team. You know, think of military units, right? Or athletic teams. I saw a great special on NFL coaches where they were talking about, look at this, you know, inside my huddle, I've got a Puerto Rican, I've got, you know, Samoans, I've got, you know, blacks, I've got whites, I've got, you know, upper class lily whites, I've got this, I've got that. But they are a team because when they fight together, when they work together for a purpose and they, you know, exert together, you know, they become something different. All those other characteristics go away. Not true of like Terrell Owens and things like that. He's still got a big ego, but the other things go away. But anyway, the ability to build those kinds of relationships and help groups build that can be huge. Commitment to new knowledge. Again, the understanding that new problems are going to arise, new solutions, I'm going to have to look for them. And I don't have all the right ideas, and we don't have all the right ideas. Other people can help. And an understanding that an idea, even a wacky one, can lead to a good one. And that you need to keep bringing, new inputs in. And then finally, capacity for coherence. Somebody who can sort of look across it all and understand. And if you go back to my chess metaphor, I think you'll kind of get that. You're not going to win a chess match if you don't have the ability to sort of sum things up and look across things. Now those are tough. And again, can you train those? No, you can develop those over time. Can you hire for those? Yeah. So you can change a hiring profile for this kind of leader. But again, it's great to have this kind of leadership everywhere. Now, that's what leaders are. If you have good leadership, he talks about what happens in the members area, and that is commitment. You know, if you have that, you can get commitment, external commitment, commitment from others outside, and commitment inside. And then the results, if you put all this in place, the results are more good things happen and less bad things happen. In other words, it's not Wonderland, it's not utopia. It's just like if you're constantly making this happen, then more good things happen and fewer bad things happen. In other words, that wall starts to move, right? And it's not dramatic and it's not overnight, but ultimately more good things start to happen. I should be moving this way because I had the green arrows going this way. You know, over time, movement occurs. So to sum it up and end my monologue here, I don't have the answer to how do you absolutely change an organization. Nobody does. And it's going to depend organization to organization and context to context. But these principles seem to be important. These principles are in place when cultures are changing. So these are the things I would suppose that we should look at. And all of us are smarter than any of us. I like that a lot. And I use that when I work with groups. Because sometimes there's somebody in the group, maybe sometimes the leader, who thinks they know more than everybody else. But I know that any group of us could think about this and come up with better solutions than any individual in that group. Especially because, you know, if you create these learning organizations where it becomes natural for people to volunteer ideas and, you know, not have feelings hurt and so on and so on, when you get those kinds of teams going, it really is powerful. Now, although we may get there, ultimately, although we may never get there because there's no real there, right? You're never going to get to where there's accidents don't happen. It's not going to happen. But you can certainly make progress. That progress, to summarize, is going to require leadership that generates 4 things: moral purpose, quality relationships, quality ideas, and that new culture comes out of that. Okay, I'm done officially, but now I'm going to give you one more thought. I was thinking about this last night as I polished up this presentation, and I thought to myself, I wonder if a culture of safety whether it's really about safety, or whether it's really about a culture of people who think together and who are these cohesive teams and care about each other. And so I think you get a culture of safety not necessarily by focusing on safety. And I haven't really thought that all the way through, and it'll be a while before I do, if I do. But I thought I'd plant that one little seed of incongruity for you to wrestle with too. Maybe we get safety by going at these cohesive environments and places where we have a culture of, you know, of commitment. Anyway, that's that. Or is safety the product of a culture that values organizational learning and team? I think it may be that. I think a culture of safety may come from something like that. And thank you.